So Briahna Joy Gray, former Bernie Sanders press secretary, and Virgil Texas of Chapo Trap House, they have a new podcast called Bad Faith Pod, which, by the way, you guys should all check out. So they created quite a stir yesterday in the Twitter sphere when they had Noam Chomsky on the podcast, and they challenged him on this idea of lesser of two evils voting. As you all probably know, Chomsky has been out front saying, look, Biden may not be that great, but you really got to vote for him because of the existential threat of Trump, and especially climate change is something that Noam has talked a lot about. Briahna and Virgil both have very different views on these things, so they challenged him on it. Let's play a little bit of Briahna engaging with Noam on this topic, and then we'll react on the other side.
What are the long-term consequences of everybody on the broad left, Democrats, liberals, everyone, saying that under any circumstances, we will vote for a Democratic candidate as long as they are incrementally better than the Republican candidate? Does that way of thinking contribute to the rightward shift of the Democratic Party over years? And what mechanism will ever stop that shift if we're not willing to ever, under any circumstances, leverage our votes?
What you're saying, if you think it through, is we should help Trump win because maybe in the long run, that'll affect the Democratic Party. That's a terrible choice. Helping Trump win, as you're proposing, would mean 4 more years of destruction of the environment, getting possibly to tipping points, which would be irreversible, certainly making any effort to deal with it very difficult. It would mean stacking the judiciary with young, ultra-right lawyers, top to bottom, so that nothing would be possibly done for a generation, and I can go on and on. I don't think that's a wise choice, just on the hope that maybe sometime in the long term, the Democratic Party will pay attention to the fact that you're part of the 50% of non-voters.
So very interesting exchange there. I want to check out they had a whole hour-long conversation I want to check out in full. Let me start with the worst reactions online, which fell to me into 2 categories. One was people were just like, how dare you question Noam Chomsky? He's in his 90s, like, leave him alone. Look, he's obviously perfectly able to handle himself.
Also, he'd be the first person to be like, question the hell out of him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, that kind of thinking of like, we should just let people go and not challenge them, and he's beyond reproach, that's just ridiculous to me. And like you said, I think he'd be the first to want to engage in this discussion and have this debate, and he handles himself, perfectly fine. The other really stupid vein of criticism went down this whole rabbit hole of like, this is why Bernie Sanders lost. Because Briahna Joy Gray, I saw this a lot online, because Briahna Joy Gray was the press secretary, and she's criticizing Noam Chomsky like this is what was wrong with the Bernie Sanders campaign, which to me is also bonkers because, number one, we had Briahna on the show all the time during the Sanders campaign. She handles herself very well. She was very effective surrogate and spokesperson for him. But also, like, how many voters were voting based on who Bernie Sanders staffers were? This view to me is bonkers. You hear it with Briahna, you hear it with David Sirota as well, and with other members of his staff. But I think those 2 in particular are like a lightning rod for that thing. So that was the other bonkers part of the criticism here.
What's really dumb about that is if he had listened to the 2 of them, he probably would have won more. I mean, almost certainly, especially Sirota, right? I mean, if he had, I mean, they both, like, it's not a secret. I'm not revealing anything here, but like, they probably wanted a more aggressive strategy against Biden than Bernie decided to take. My friend Joe, all of that, I think they both, I mean, given their public posturing now, it's very clear how they both feel about Biden.
Nina's the other one that comes in for a lot of criticism, who also I think was pushing him to go a little harder.
Once again, so maybe, as we've shown pretty definitively here, which that you can lower Joe Biden's favorables quite a bit if you would like to, as long as you focus on the correct issues, which all 3 of them I thought were very up to doing, and Bernie's the one who decided not to. So maybe if he listened to them, he wouldn't have lost, right? I mean, very possible. Very dumb criticism in my view.
So on the substance, I think this debate is really interesting, and I actually got a lot thinking through this exchange. I disagree with both sides in certain ways as I was thinking this through. So Noam, and I think a lot of people who are in his same vein, attribute worse characteristics to Trump than I do. They buy into, there's been like two theories on the left of Trump. One is the one that I basically subscribe to, Ross Douthat articulated in the Times, Matt Taibbi has articulated. I did a whole thing here is basically like Trump is like an expression of late stage capitalism. He's like consumerism and celebrity culture run amok. He's this bumbling idiot. Even if he wanted to be like an effective authoritarian dictator, he can't get his act together to actually do it. I think we've seen that sort of manifest bumbling over and over and over again. And that doesn't mean that that person can't be dangerous and do harm. My fear after the election is not that Trump is going to foment some coup and like get the military to back him or whatever. Like we just see no sign that even if he wanted to pull that off or like had that idea in his head, that he would be able to hold on to that plan for more than 5 seconds. I do worry about unrest in the wake of the election, frankly, on both sides of the aisle. So I think Noam buys more into the like Trump is a unique threat to our democracy.
Yes, he does.
Like he is, I don't know that he's used the word Hitler, although I think that he has, that he is like truly as dangerous as a Hitlerian figure. I just don't agree with that assessment of Trump. And I don't think it's reflected in, and again, I'm not saying he hasn't done like bad things that I've disagreed with strenuously here, but I think he's much more sort of bumbling demagogue than he is actual, authoritarian, like organized type figure in the way that Chomsky does. On the other side, and this is the piece that I frankly have thought through and am still kind of in progress of thinking through, so humor me here for a moment. The argument that I've made and that Briahna and Virgil make there is basically like, look, if we just always go along with whoever the Democratic Party says we have to vote for, we have no power. Why would they ever care anything that we say when we just like, the end of the day, we're like, okay, fine, we'll vote for Joe Biden. Or if it's Michael Bloomberg, like, okay, fine, we'll vote for Michael Bloomberg because they're slightly better than the alternative. And so they say, look, we've got to withhold our votes to have any power. And I think that has a lot of logical sense, except if you go back to 2016, that's basically what happened.
Yes, it is.
Right? Significant enough numbers of Sanders supporters or leftists withheld their vote from Hillary Clinton that, now, let me be clear, like Jill Stein voters are not the reason why Hillary Clinton lost, but that actually is what liberals think happened.
Yeah.
Like, they did so in enough numbers that liberals did actually learn this lesson of like, oh my God, the leftists and the Jill Stein people, they're the reason that we have Donald Trump. And so, and again, I don't think that is reality, but that is what they've internalized as what happened in that election. What did they do in response to that? They didn't move to the left. It didn't work in terms of like, now the left has all this power and they're actually listening to us because they felt our wrath and some people stayed home or some people voted for Jill Stein. Instead, they made it even more certain that Bernie Sanders got crushed, that, Pelosi, you see the way that she treats anyone on the left in the House caucus with contempt. And ultimately you end up with Obama and everybody else like organizing to make sure that Joe Biden, who was probably outside of Bloomberg, the furthest right candidate on that stage this time around, that he ends up being the nominee. So that's a real challenge to this idea that if you just like withhold your vote and you cause electoral damage, that is ultimately going to lead you where you want to go with the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and look, actually, electoral damage is generally how parties reform and how they change. I mean, you can go ask the GOP. The GOP keeps asking, why does nobody like us? Why have we not won 7 out of the 8 last popular vote elections? Well, there's a lot of reasons why, which I've talked about here. And if you think about it, millions of people withhold their vote every election. They're called non-voters, right?
Absolutely.
They withhold their vote as a basically screw you to the whole system.
Right.
And I mean, remember you always talk about those black voters in Milwaukee who were like, I didn't vote and I don't feel bad about it.
No, I don't regret it.
Yeah. Like, I regret nothing because realistically, they're like, neither candidate was going to do anything for me, so I just don't care. That's actually most voters and most voter eligible people in America.
Yeah.
Maybe we should think more about that.
Well,
why are we not held to the same standard as every average American? Mm-hmm. Every average American makes protest votes all the time. I mean, if you're a political leader, why are you not allowed to do that? Why are you not allowed to say, hey, you know what? I mean, look, I live here in Washington, D.C. I'm going to vote because I think voting is important. My vote does not matter. It's a 97 Democratic state.
Yeah.
It literally does not matter unless I'm picking whoever the alderman is. And even then it's like, which, corrupt person am I going to pick for this one? And so it's the same thing when you go and you think about it within that structurally. it's on the politicians to make me feel like my vote matters and to inspire me to do it. Now, again, I'm 100%. Going to, but that doesn't mean I don't have the right to do whatever I want.
100%. Yeah. And I will never, vote shaming to me. Yeah. First of all, it's just stupid. It doesn't work, right? It does not win people over to your side, and it never will. The one point that Noam Chomsky made here that I thought was interesting and relates to this idea of like, look, we did this to a certain extent in 2016. Liberals think that leftists are the reason that Trump is president, and yet they move the party even more to the right. So in terms of like the evidence that strategy of withholding your vote alone is actually going to get you where you want to go, that evidence doesn't exist down of 2016. And the thing that Noam said on this is he's like, do you think that they care if you get added to the 50% of voters who don't vote? And that's the part, I'm paraphrasing, that wasn't exactly his wording, but that was basically the idea. And I think that's the issue here is that they've decided they actually don't want leftists in the party. They want you to stay home. They want you to be like gone and out of the Democratic Party. They're happy to have that outcome. They feel like they've got this coalition. They're winning over all these suburbanites who are more conservative on economic issues in particular, and they would prefer to have that coalition. That's more comfortable for them.
Absolutely.
So I think we have to keep that in mind, that actually they don't really care if you're in the coalition or not. In fact, they would rather not have you in the coalition, even as they're like, badgering you have to vote for Biden, you have to vote for Biden. Ultimately, they're never going to center the party around you just because you flex your muscle in these ways. There has to be a different strategy to actually take over the Democratic Party. I personally think, as we've discussed here, that is a more likely successful outcome than trying to start with a third party, but other people may feel otherwise. Anyway, it was an interesting conversation. The reaction to it was very revealing. I thought the conversation itself was very revealing and brought up a lot of thoughts of my own.
It was really interesting. I'm glad we could bring it to everybody.
All right, we're going to have more Rising for you after this.